In 2017, a group of researchers coined a term, orthosomnia. It was the clinical name for a new kind of anxiety they'd been seeing in their clinics. Patients would show up obsessed with the sleep metrics from their smartwatches and tracking rings. But when the doctors actually studied them, many of these people were sleeping perfectly fine. They were anxious mostly because their sleep score said something must be off. These devices have now exploded in popularity. More than a third of Americans now say they've used one to track their own sleep. So, is all this tracking just stressing us out? And why did so many of us decide to optimize something as unpredictable as sleep in the first place?
You know, sleep it's not a commodity. You can do everything right and still have a difficult night of sleep. You can have a difficult night and still perform well. And if you think about sleep as every single night has to be your best possible night, that's going to lead you to be stressed out and have worse sleep. Sleep should be enjoyable and not trying to just think about sleep as one more thing you have to do and have to get in to have your optimal performance. And you know, that can really be a negative thing.
In 2017, you coined this term, orthosomnia. Tell me what the phrase means and what it was that made you want to come up with a word for something that you were seeing among your patients.
So in the years running up to that, we had noticed that people were, you know, really into tracking their sleep. And, you know, as a psychologist and sleep researcher, I mean, my first response is that I love this, you know, that people are interested in their sleep. In the big picture, this is a wonderful thing. But as clinicians, we were all noticing that people were coming in saying, like, I'm not getting enough sleep, or I'm not, you know, this is saying I'm sleeping lightly. And going back in those early days, the devices were movement only and the algorithms were not very good. And so, like, we knew that the data they were looking at wasn't even very accurate. And they were sometimes like making some really serious decisions, like taking heavy duty sleeping medications or doing things we felt that was like, you know, maladaptive for their sleep. And, you know, as a sleep researcher, like, it's so wonderful that people are interested in their sleep. But when it becomes something you're trying to, you know, control and maximize, and so you can be productive in the day and sleep hard at night, and, you know, it really turned into a negative thing. And we looked around in the literature to say, like, well, has this been studied? What is this? You know, and, you know, we knew there was a term called orthorexia, which is the obsession with like right or like, you know, clean eating. And so we kind of modeled it after that. And so as a clinician, we started talking amongst ourselves and, you know, my colleagues were like, wait, I have a case and I have a case and I have a case. And it really is something that hits home because, you know, we see it pretty regularly. And, you know, I do it every week in my clinic. Somebody is just like shoving their phone at me.
And just to be clear, the thing that concerns you is that there is a line that seems to be crossed from these devices going from being helpful to being harmful to people. Talk a little bit about that line, what it is and what happens when they become less useful or even potentially harmful.
So, yeah, I think trackers can be really helpful if somebody's trying to, you know, have a goal of having enough time. Like, I know if I don't go to bed before 10:30, there's no chance I'm going to get anywhere near the 7 hours of sleep that I think I need to function at my best. And it's always a struggle for years and years. You know, there's some people that buy the devices and the numbers make them feel bad, you know, that they feel like, oh, I was up again, I'm more hopeless. In other cases, they become competitive and they, you know, they're like, how do I get to a score of 100? But, you know, I think it's pretty cool that some of the companies are making some changes based on reactions. Apple changed it from calling it light sleep, stage 2, to core sleep. And I think that's really cool because stage 2 is the greatest amount of sleep that you have in your night. More than half of your night should be light sleep or stage 2. And people were freaking out saying, I have 50% light sleep. And then I have to tell them, no, that's normal. You're supposed to have that much light sleep. So changing the name of how we package these and, you know, being responsible how we share this information with consumers, I think can be really helpful at reducing that anxiety. Other sort of things, you know, I believe that like Google, Fitbit, you know, they've just redesigned their app. They're, you know, the whole sleep score was sort of a black box, and many companies are looking at like giving you more feedback on what goes into that score. Because, you know, like any honor student, I want to get 100%. It's what does it mean to get, you know, a 70 or 80? And does it really correspond to a poor night of sleep? Or what behaviors are we trying to encourage in people?
It seems to me there are two things going on here. One is that we as consumers of these devices are not doctors, obviously, and we don't really know perhaps what all of the data means. And like the patient who came to you and said, I'm only getting 50% of core sleep. And actually, yes, that's exactly what they should be doing. So we don't know what is normal. But it seems to me there's another problem, which is that sometimes the professionals, even people such as yourself, sleep is still somewhat of a mystery. And in your case, you've said that even you couldn't tell a patient how much deep sleep is optimal for that patient. So there seem to be two areas which could lead to confusion around what the data is telling people.
Yeah, I think we don't overthink for one individual the percentage of deep or light or REM sleep. That data, perhaps studying in a population study of thousands of people, that would be meaningful. Or they've done studies where they've selectively deprived people of REM and looked at metabolic effects or that sort of thing. But in one individual, there's a lot of differences between people. I sometimes share with patients my own data. It shows I don't get as much deep sleep as other people do. And I'm a healthy 47-year-old. I exercise a lot. I don't think I have necessarily more sleep problems than other people, but I can share with them and say, like, this number is normal for me. I'm not worried about it. And so that's kind of what I want people to know is that, there's a range of normal for any of these stage variables. But the devices, really should be used to look at, what is your pattern?
Does it drive you crazy as a doctor that people are starting to trust devices more than they are medical professionals?
I think it's really interesting. I mean, what I don't like is when they send me like page by page of every single day. But, it really opens a conversation. And so I think that's really good. What I don't want is that people trying to stress out about like, okay, I only got a 80 today on my score, and that means I'm going to have a terrible day. Like we all know you can have a bad night of sleep and still have a decent day. Like it's not necessarily a one-to-one.
But I sometimes wonder whether sleep is just the kind of tip of the iceberg or one of the things we're talking about in a world in which technology is allowing everybody to become consumers who optimize their lives. And that sometimes it's a pattern that you see in sleep, but can show up in multiple other ways. It shows up around exercise, for example. And it can be beneficial to individuals, but I'm not convinced it always is beneficial.
What patients don't understand is you can't have that optimal night every night. And so, that was one really good night, but it doesn't mean that you can reproduce that. Like you still have your average. Sleep is subjective. It's how you feel during the day. It's how you perform across the day. It's not just about the minutes. And actually, even in our studies with polysomnograms, the actual minutes of sleep and stages of sleep don't map on well with how you perform during the day necessarily. That it's really, there's a subjective sense of sleep that doesn't exactly map on to the number of minutes and that sort of thing. It's more complicated than that. Like, are you a night owl trying to shove yourself into waking up at 5 a.m. or 4 a.m. to go to the gym? That'll also make you feel not as good, but even if you get the right amount of sleep.
I'm somebody who likes to go to bed fairly early to make sure that I get as much sleep as possible. And I do tend to stress about sleep, and I'm not sure that I want to stress about it more than I already do. But this is super helpful. I love the idea that I actually think the idea that there is no optimal night of sleep, I find that very liberating. I mean, I actually find that in and of itself is a helpful thing to know.
Oh, I like that framing.
Dr. Baron, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.